Hi everyone, I'm Kelsey. This is Essentially Booked and thank you for stopping by my channel today. I am finally going to do my February reading wrap up. I had a really great February as far as reading quantity and quality wise. I read 13 books and I only had a few flops and then most of them were like pretty great. So one thing I want to say is I do read really diversely and I read widely and I read according to current events. I was extremely disheartened when I posted my TBR for March and I lost, I think, 7% of my followers because I posted about how I like to read books about current issues and legislation, particularly in my state where there's a ton of homophobic legislation going on and transphobic legislation. So I talk about that here and I don't shy away from it. I am extremely liberal, and if that's not your thing, like, good riddance. Like, I don't really want to I'm not going to edit the type of content I'm putting out because I do believe all people matter and we shouldn't be discriminating in legislation. And so it was just disheartening to see that, like, I lost a lot of followers because I read diversely, but it is what it is. So with that being said, we will get into my February reading wrap up. I'm going to start with my flops. There really only were 3 kind of. So I've been reading the Saga series and I feel like of late, sorry, that was my dog. So you're going to hear a little Gussie in the background, but I feel like of late I've had a few flops, particularly in the Saga series. So, and I read 2 volumes of Saga. I read 7 and 8. And I'm just I think I'm done with the series, but there's only 10 out right now. So I think I'm going to keep reading. I have 2 of them out. I'm just not vibing with it anymore. It's just getting a little wild for me. And this is a very graphic series, graphic for a graphic novel, like very sexual, all of that. But I'm just not, the story is just too much at this point. There's so many things going and I'm not sure this medium is working for me, but I will read till book 10 because I am the way that I am. And then we'll just kind of go from there. So those were 2 books and they were just pretty middle of the road for me this month. And then my other flop was Fair Play, which I talked about in my book of the month reading vlog. And this is essentially a book about allocating roles within the home where you deal cards with your partner as to tasks in your life and just to make sure you guys are equitably distributing the work together. As far as like picking up your kids, taking out the trash, birthday parties, Christmases, holidays, like just all these things. And it's very much written for a privileged family with a lot of money. Also forget, it's very meant for someone with kids and with a partner. And I am very lucky in that my partner and I do very equitably distribute the work in our household. So I get the point of this book, but it could have not been a book. It should have just been a game with like an introductory essay versus a whole book. But it got a book out of my book of the month stack. So pretty happy with that. And then I read I had a lot of really good books this month. So we're going to next talk about the like books that I liked but weren't my top books of the month. Okay, so for my books that I really enjoyed this month, I'd say like 3 to like 4-ish star books. First were some romances. So I read Take the Lead by Alexis Dario, which is a re-release, and it is a Dancing with the Stars style romance. It released on February 14th. And it's her very first novel that she wrote. So I think it actually came out in like 2007, but then the publisher is re-releasing it with new covers. I love her covers. So Take the Lead was the first one. Book. I read the newest Well Met book. So that is by Jen DeLuca. It takes place in a Renaissance fair world. And this time it is about a lawyer and then kind of the Romeo of I can't think of the term, but like the player of the romance Renaissance fair. And it's called Well Traveled. I really liked it. I loved that it was about an attorney who was like, private practice is kind of the worst, and takes care of herself and leaves private practice for something else and takes a break. And I think that it made a lot of really great commentary on the practice of law, which I used to be in a private practice law firm. I clerked there and then I practiced for like a month and a half, like not very long, and quickly knew that the work-life balance was not for me. So then I moved to corporate. And I do like a JD preferred type job, and it has been the best, like as far as career growth and work-life balance and just everything. So I love that book for that reason. And then in my girls' weekend that I went on, a lot of us read Alone by Megan Freeman, which is a middle grade book, and it's a novel in verse. about about like a 12-year-old who tries to kind of play her divorced parents so that she can go have a slumber party with her friends at her grandparents' vacation rental. Her friends back out at the last moment, and there's just some inklings of like some stuff going on in society in the background. Like it takes place in present day. And so her friends back out, but she still proceeds to stay at her grandparents' house. In the middle of the night, there's pounding on the door and she's terrified, so she doesn't respond. And when she wakes up in the morning, the whole area has been evacuated. And it's a survival story over 3 or so years in which she's just trying to survive while hoping her family comes back to find her. And you don't really know what happens until like the last page, and then the book ends. And it was really fast read, really riveting. I think because it was middle grade, like for me, it wasn't a 5-star, it was more of a 4-star for middle grade, just because there were some plot holes that as a kid I probably wouldn't have cared about, but for me I did care about, and hence the lower rating, but it was still extremely good. Another middle of the road book for me was Recursion by Blake Crouch. And this was a 3-star. This is not my favorite one. I also talked about this in the Book of the Month reading vlog, so I won't really go into it, but just a lot of whiplash. But Blake Crouch will lead you through to the end. You're supposed to be confused a little bit, like that's just his thing. He makes you feel smarter than you are. So it was just a fun way to get another Book of the Month off my desk. Okay, and now for some hits for me. I read 2 kind of witchy books this month. The very first one is Wayward by Amelia Hart. That publishes on March 7th, and it was a Book of the Month pick this month. I loved it. It follows 3 women throughout history. So one is like Salem witch trials, one is World War II, one is present day. They're all of the same family line, and they have like a hard path. The first woman, it starts off with her trial as like a witch. And you kind of see how that echoes throughout the family line. And then all of them deal with storylines regarding women in pregnancy and women in loss. And I would say it's less magical than I thought it was when I picked it up. It would be more magical realism, more nature, like, you know, crystals and herbs and that type of witchcraft, like essential oils, but in Salem, versus spells and curses and that type of thing. But it's just a really beautiful look at these 3 women going through very hard things and how they rely on their past and their ancestors and their identities to really step into who they are. I really, really loved it. I listened to it while I was painting my son's room. Another audiobook that I read this month was Honey and Spice by Bolu Babalola. And I got that from Libro FM a while ago. It was just a really fun romance, but also I'd say it's new adult, takes place in a college, and it's 2 podcasters, videographers that kind of fall in love, and just, it was fun. It was just a fun experience. So I definitely recommend that if you're just looking for a fun audiobook that has like that mixed media component too. So fun. And then my other witchy book was Venco. I got this in multiple formats. I had it as an advanced review copy through NetGalley. I had it as an advanced listening copy through Libro. I got it as a physical copy from Dog-Eared Books, which is a subscription I do. And I read it in all the formats. It's so fun. So this is about a coven of witches who they need to all come together by a certain date, or like the witch hunter that's chasing them will kind of ruin their line, but it has a lot of representation. So there's a trans character, there's indigenous characters, there's people of color, and it's fun. Like the characters are all so fun, so strong personalitied, and there's like a road trip component where they have to find all these spoons and they drive across the country. I loved it. It was just so much fun. Definitely want to read her other book, Empire of the Wild, which is an arc that I meant to read earlier this year but didn't get to, so I will try to prioritize it this year as well. This will probably be in my like favorites of the year if I think about it. Like I just keep thinking about it and how much I loved it. It was just a fun ride. And then Take My Hand, I also talked about in my Book of the Month reading vlog for this month. Fantastic historical fiction, all the stars, loved it. And I finally finished The Making of Biblical Womanhood, which I have been reading with a study group from my church. This is, in my opinion, every Christian woman should read it. I come from a historian background. The main author is a historian, and she's looking at how women became subjugated throughout history to be the less dominant sex, and looking at it through both a biblical lens, because she's like a pastor's wife, she has the historian knowledge to read the text, and then to look at it through history and how institutions have tampered down women and how the church has hurt women and like gone against what the gospel says. I will just say Jesus came back to life and he appeared to women first. And that tells me something about the value of women within church, but church with a capital C tends to subjugate women. It's so good. And from like a historian component from that, I appreciated it. From the commentary in our current political climate, I appreciated, like, it was just fantastic. All the stars. So my final book is Mama or Mame. I gave it 5 stars and I loved it. It's a coming of age novel about this girl, Maddie, who lives in London, and she is from Ghana. Her mom lives in Ghana while her dad is still in London, and he has a form of dementia, and she's the primary caretaker because her like brother and her mom just, you know, are too self-centered to help, and they kind of put all this burden on her. And she is a very like passive, quiet person. Through this dynamic, there's a family tragedy that strikes, and she is just done. She's done all that she can for her family. It is not her responsibility to be the primary caretaker of her dad. Her mom should be coming back to do this. And it becomes this like journey of self-discovery. She moves out of her family home. She has relationships. She leaves a job for a new one and like speaks up for herself. And a lot of what I loved about this book is it is pretty graphic as far as like the sex scenes, but a lot of it is the commentary of women and how in society expectations, especially in her culture where there are these expectations of how you care for your family to the detriment of yourself. And she does get into these relationships and they're not great, but she doesn't have a reference for what a great relationship is. She doesn't have a reference for like what good sex is even, or like what is an appropriate dynamic in these circumstances. And so you kind of watch her realize like what is healthy and what is good and what she deserves. And I loved it. And it has a beautiful cover. Like, it was just so good. And so much commentary on womanhood and like stepping into your own. And I'm glad it was in a book of the month. Like, it needs the hype it gets. I just really, really loved it. So all in all, I had a fantastic March. I read a ton of great books, and I will come back with some stats here in a little bit. Whew. Okay, so quickly, just some stats for the month. I gave 5 books 3 stars. So I gave 4 stars to 4 books. I gave 5 stars to 3 books, which is really good for me. And then I gave 2 stars to 2 books. And so the math should come out to at least 12. And if it doesn't, whoops. But I had a fantastic month of reading in February. And for it being a short month, like, that was, honestly, it's one of my better Februarys I've had in a really long time. So I'm pretty happy with my February books. And I will say I had such a good February that I started March off very slow. Today is March 6th and I just finished my first book, but I'm reading like 5 books at the same time. I have a few slow but steadies. I'm going to finish Babel here soon. So that's okay. I'll probably actually like quickly this week have more books finished. But I'm really excited to see what March brings, and I'm super happy about February. So thanks for watching this video, and until the next one, I'll see you guys later. Bye.